Hello and welcome to the MB Om podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the MBM podcast. Today on the podcast, I've got special guest Kurt Johnsen, who is the founder of American Power Yoga based out of Dallas. And Kurt is here to chat a little bit about what it was like to found a really big popular yoga studio, how his career kind of took off from there, some of the biggest business lessons he's learned through his career, and then ultimately what led to him actually selling American Power Yoga and starting a new company that he's founded called Simplified Genetics. So we talk quite a bit about both American Power Yoga and Simplified Genetics. Simplified Genetics is less related directly to the yoga industry, but I think there's some really interesting lessons there, and Kurt is super passionate, so it's really interesting to hear about. So I hope that you guys enjoy this episode, and here is Kurt. I'm super excited to be joined on the podcast today with Kurt Johnsen. Kurt's joining me from Dallas, Texas. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Kurt. It's awesome to have you here.
Oh, my pleasure. Absolutely.
And so I know you have an amazing bio. I was reading through your bio before this call and I was like, wow, this guy has done so many amazing things. But I think a really great place to start is to back up and talk about how you first got into yoga.
Yeah. Cool. And thank you. Yeah. It's been a very interesting journey. I got into yoga through Kung Fu, honestly. I was never a big yogi, growing up, I wanted to be two things in my life. I wanted to be either James Bond or the president of a television network. And seriously, in the pursuit of the former, I wanted to learn martial arts. And I got real lucky. This is way back, I was looking through the yellow pages, pre-internet, and in the martial arts section, and I found the Energy Balancing Center, and I thought that's what I want to do. I was mid-20s or so, and I was either real up or real down, and just kind of on that roller coaster, and I thought, I want to balance my energy. So that's where I found my instructor, and who I trained with this morning, 25, 30 years later, we still train together. And that led me to Tibetan Kung-Fu. So I started studying the lightning, fire, mountain system of Tibetan Kung-Fu. And a lot of people equate Kung-Fu with fighting and whatnot. Certainly there is, self-defense in it. But, the warriors back in the day were also the healers and the spiritual guides of the community, as well as the protectors. So, it's easy to hurt people. Humans are pretty fragile. You train for a couple of years and you can hurt a lot of people very easily. The natural pursuit is to learn how to heal. So all, real Kung Fu systems have, acupuncture, which I've learned, and herbology, which I've learned, and Reiki and Tai Chi and Qigong and yoga and meditation and all that. It's an operating system. In fact, I call yoga an operating system as well. Kung Fu to me is even a more complete operating system. So anyway, I studied that for a long time, and then it was two things really led me into yoga itself. And the first was honestly just my instructor kept getting asked to teach a yoga class, and he didn't want to. And he suggested I do. And I was like, sure, I'll do that. And but I really got passionate about it. I got into it for about 6 months. I turned my younger sister onto it just a little bit. She's a hardcore super type A. She's working at KPMG and just, killing it and that type of stuff. And it was about just 6 months in when my mom had a heart attack. She was working for me at the time. I started my first business when I was 12, so I've always had companies. And I had a lighting company, a residential lighting company, representative firm, and we were at the trade show in Dallas, and everyone was there. And my mom had a heart attack, and she, no one knew she had heart problems. She didn't want to tell anyone or worry anyone. But anyway, she had a heart attack, there in front of everyone, about 50 salespeople. And we rushed to the hospital. My sister met me at the hospital, and the doctors came out and said, look, you're going to have to say goodbye. And so my sister and I both had not dealt with death directly, really. We had a couple distant grandparents, but nothing really like this. And I remember my sister, crying and just sheet white and just saying that she couldn't do it. And it was there in the hospital corridor. We started talking about yoga, the breathing techniques to be present, and that every challenge serves. And we use the breathing to stay, not pass out, to stay focused. And we said goodbye to our mom, who passed away later on that day. And that was really when I got the power of a yoga practice. That was that moment. And I guess, actually even earlier when I was free spirited, so I was sent to military school as a child. And even back then I started to train in astral projection or lucid dreaming, two offshoots or yoga practices. So, it gets down to that awareness. But in that moment, saying goodbye to our mom, that was when I figured out how powerful it was. So fast forward, about 6 years or 5 years, and I still had the company that I was working with. My mom was working for me at the time when she passed away, and then I was also vice president of another company out of California, in hospitality lighting. So one company was residential, one was hospitality, and it was, my sister was still working for KPMG, and that's when 9/11 happened, and I was stuck in Huntington. My sister was actually en route on an American Airlines flight to Philadelphia, and there was a lot of very scary times then. And for whatever reason, I just thought, I'm working to retire. Actually, I was mid-30s. I was making good money. I'm not super great money, but for a single guy, I was making a very comfortable living. But I was just bored. It meant nothing to me. And so when we finally gathered back in Dallas after a few days, my sister and I just, we talked about it. I said, I want to do something more with my life. Right now I'm working to retire, and that just seems like a waste of a perfectly good life. So we debated what to do. How could we make a difference? And that's really it. And, she wanted to do something with animals. But I kept coming back to that moment in the hospital, that when her and I used the conversation about yoga to keep it together and say goodbye to our mom. I thought that was, if we shared that tool with people, we would be doing good. We would be changing the world, at least our little part of it. So, we set out to do that. And, I looked around at, I traveled a great deal in running the sales companies, and you can't really pop into Kung Fu places, right? So I started just popping into yoga places all over the place. And there was beauty. It was just starting to pop. It was probably early 2000, 99, something like that. And they were really cool. There were a couple cool studios in LA and New York and Arizona and stuff. And they're round, and there's music, and there's water, and there's fire, and there's all kinds. But no one was talking about what yoga really is. There were a bunch of Cirque du Soleil type cats and all this other stuff. People were speaking different languages. No one, in my opinion, was laying it out, except for one cat, Brian Kest out of Santa Monica. I resonated with him a great deal. So I thought, okay, well, we'll do our own. And that's really where it came out. My sister was like, you can't do that. I was like, sure I can. So we started a State of Mind power yoga in Dallas. And oddly enough, I was working on getting a URL, and I got Dallas Power Yoga. I thought, that's great. And I was like, maybe we'll grow. So I got Texas Power Yoga. I was like, that's great. And I was like, I wonder if American Power Yoga is available. And it was. And I was like, yes, that's when it kind of, it just lucked into it. But it made sense because, my background was one of a mutt. And to me, and I have a genetic company as well. So mutts are some of the healthiest animals. And I think America is great because we're a mutt country in many ways. Everyone's from everywhere, and that's what makes us great, that diversity. And I think that, and also that resilience and that strive for freedom and rights that we have to pursue happiness. We're the only country on the planet that has that in, their documents. It's amazing. It's really, and it's unfortunate right now with the current environment, people are forgetting that. But man, we are here to pursue happiness. That's why America was founded. So I think it was a great tie-in America and yoga. Now, I've gotten pushback over the years, and I get it, but I'll still defend it and still stand by it. So, with the guidelines to an American Power Yoga was really accessibility. And that's where, my instructors, couldn't lead by name of pose because that's not teaching. If that's the case, you could just write names of poses on the wall and go 10 breaths each and walk out of the room. So I wanted to communicate in the native tongue of the instructor. I wanted to actually tell people what to do on the physical front. But also I wanted to make sure that every single class all the instructors I've trained about 500, create ambassadors. The number one reason people don't do yoga is fear. And that to me is insanity. No one should fear yoga.
Totally.
So every class, I want to remind people, look, it's not a physical practice. Yoga is two things, man. It is showing up where all of life happens, and that's always right here and right now. And then it is an embracing reality as is, right here, right now. That to me is the operating system of yoga. Honestly, using poses is a little problematic because people start to think that it's about some stupid pose, and it's not. Most of the poses in yoga come from British gymnastics. There's no crazy, special, magical in it. These poses can help remind us how magical we are, but the poses themselves don't matter at all. And again, way back in my day, way back in high school when I was with this crazy magician who's teaching me lucid dreaming and out-of-body astral projection, as they call it, that was my early forms of yoga. So, I was confused by this physicality of the practice because it just didn't make sense. I get it as a tool, but I was really dumbfounded when people wouldn't mention it. They would just, do this pose and it will make everything better. I'm like, no, it won't. Change, show up and embrace reality. That makes everything better. And then also that affects change. And that's why we're on this planet. I mean, we're all visiting. So, do some good, have some fun, and don't take anything too seriously because we're just visiting anyway. So, so that's, and then, then like Yoga Alliance shows up, and that was really kind of funny because I'd been training for so long and they came up out of the blue. And, I spent about a year arguing with them because I did not come from a yoga school. I took this from a Kung Fu system and really kind of forged it ourselves. And again, I didn't create it. I packaged it. To me, the yoga that we do and that I offer it all stems from this wheel of energy of the Lightning Fire Mountains Kung Fu system. It all is sourced from them. So I don't own it. I just borrowed it and put it in hopefully a palatable presentation for people. But it took me about a year to convince Yoga Alliance that Kung Fu was not a sister art. That is all the same thing. And, now 30 years in, I mean, everything's the same thing. I can meditate while I walk or drive. I do yoga while I walk or drive. I'm doing yoga right now as I speak to you because I'm fully present. I'm embracing reality as is. Yoga is an operating system. I mean, that's it. And most of life takes place off the mat. So you've got to bring it in. I know super flexible people on a mat and they're rigid off the mat. I'm like, you're missing the point. You can wrap up a bird of paradise, cool, but can you deal with a flat tire? I mean, those are poses.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's kind of my storyline.
Yeah, definitely. That's a super powerful story. And, I love the fact that you came from this background of Kung Fu and brought that in to create sort of your own brand and your own business. Had you been teaching for very long before you opened American Power Yoga, or did you just dive right into owning a studio?
No. I dove right, credit cards and a prayer, as they put it. And I taught by donation for probably 6 months, twice a week. And, it was in a therapeutic building. When they closed, they just let me use the space and just kind of grew it from there. But really, my sister and I found a little place and we're like, are we going to do this? And it was December 10th, 2001. So it was September when we thought, hey, after 9/11, we have to do something different with our life. And we opened the doors literally by December 10th. So it was, and everyone thought we were crazy. I mean, no one said, that's a great idea. Give away your sales companies and start your own yoga system. Beautiful. Well done, Kurt. So, you got to ignore most people. Most people won't dream, and most people are they're led by fear. And, fear's a funny thing. People confuse that fear is an obstacle or something to stop us. But if you ask people what shapes their lives, what gives them the most pleasure, most would be shrouded by fear. I can tell you, starting all the companies I've done, having kids, getting married, to learning to snowboard or whatever. I mean, it's, fear gets us here. It gets us clear. It's a tool. It's something to focus us and not to stop us. So, I ignored the naysayers and we jumped in, and that if for the yoga teachers out there who want to get good, you got to teach. And that's where I taught 18 classes a week for the first 2 years. Because it took me, I had no other teachers. It was my sister and I, a good friend who, we forged the system, and then we started having to train teachers. So it was interesting. It was also way back in the day. So, things are, the market has changed, but it's neat. And still to this day, I mean, you know, I use Tai Chi as warm-ups and, you know, Qigong to cleanse, and that's all thrown into a fluid presentation of class and, you know, all that stuff. So again, the older I get, it's just all the same thing. It's kind of silly to separate it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's always been something that when people are like, you know, I've done this martial art or I've done this activity, like, well, how is yoga different? And it's one of those things that kind of stops me in my tracks, even though I totally understand what yoga is as a practitioner and a teacher. I'm like, it's kind of just life. Like, you can't package it separately. Like, you can, but you can't.
Yeah, no, and you know, again, it's funny. I consider myself a new traditionalist, because to me, a lot of people are like, oh, that's not traditional. I'm this 8-limb that, or, you know, Ashtanga that, or whatever. And that's great. But, I think in the end, you know, again, I had that mutt mentality. I think I like to, or maybe Bruce Lee is, you know, who took whatever worked and let go of what didn't work. And, you know, I think these systems are meant to be, evolving just so we can connect and relate. I mean, that's the other thing. But it's tricky. And the pose-driven practice also has a tendency to feed the ego. And, you know, that was an issue for me for, I mean, probably a decade. You know, all these things and helping people and whatnot was really just hurting me in some ways, because it was feeding my ego. And, you know, life will sort that out. But I see that a common problem with teachers, is they'll get to a certain point where, you know, they can do a bunch of the physical stuff. Hey, that's great. And then they get to help people, and people are thanking them and confiding in them. And the whole time, man, their ego is just exploding. And that's it. It's a real problem, I think. And that's where I always suggest when I train teachers to make sure that they have a well. My well is Kung Fu. My well is my instructor. And, you know, that keeps me humble, because it's such a deep well. There's always, you know, right now I'm doing full contact blindfolded.
Wow.
You know, that's hard. It's super humbling. So, what I suggest to people out there is to always have a well that's going to challenge you and humble you. And, you know, that helps. A lot of people who just have that physical practice, man, all of a sudden they can do all the poses on that poster and they think they're great. And that's very problematic.
Yeah, definitely. I think too, it's interesting to think about with yoga. I mean, the well is very deep. Like, if you just start delving into different aspects, you can learn so much about you know, just the practice of yoga, and you can dig so much deeper if you go into any type of martial art. I mean, meditation is definitely woven in within yoga, but the whole practice of meditation is a huge other well in and of itself.
Absolutely. Yeah, other well, or it's all part of the same well. It depends on the presentation. And that's why I created American Power Yoga, just because I was dissatisfied with most of the presentations out there. And, you know, and honestly, I mean, at least here in Dallas and actually elsewhere, I mean, I think there's been a movement of people going, hey, let's tell people really what's going on and really why we're doing this. So, you know, I think it's evolving as well, which is nice. And again, some people will argue the point that I don't teach. You know, I've argued with a well-known, you know, fairly regional or national instructor, and you know, he said during one of his presentations, he said, only through Sanskrit can you find enlightenment. And I said, no, that's silly. Why would one language have a monopoly on enlightenment? There's not other enlightened people out there. That's just, it's to me, it's ridiculous. So, that's where I like to mix it up. And, you know, and then, again, I respect everyone's opinion to believe in whatever serves them. But that to me didn't serve me. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. I can respect that for sure. I think my biggest thing, I mean, in life in general, is to always challenge things that I'm told. So to figure out, is that my truth, or is that somebody else's truth that they've shared with me? And it sounds like that's kind of the same thing with how, like, what the mindset you've brought to your business is, making sure that
Absolutely.
It resonates with you.
Yeah. Well, and I'm a contrarian. And also, and I get a lot of grief, particularly my current marketing person with my company, Simplified Genetics. You know, she's like, you don't look at what other people are doing. I'm like, no, I don't do competitive analysis ever. To me, it's distracting, and you end up making a cheap imitation of what everyone else is trying to do. To me, if you don't have enough passion within what you want to do, that you need to get ideas from other people, then I would keep looking for something else to that you're more passionate about. I mean, I'm not saying, hey, it's good to go study and go learn for sure, but from a business standpoint, I've never been one to, okay, what's everyone else doing? What's the most successful doing? That type of stuff. I just, I got to just do it from my heart. It's that passion. It's all a passion project.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great way to kind of keep comparison out as well, to make sure that you're not comparing yourself to other businesses and other yoga teachers and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, it's that, and it's also, and it's funny because you'll see it a lot in the industry, kind of a finite, an infinite versus a finite mentality. There's 10 people in, so-and-so's class. Those 10 people aren't in my class, as opposed to going, there's millions of people in the world. All the classes can be full. So, that type of thing. So it's interesting. It's and there's different philosophies out there for sure. I remember when we first started, my sister and I, there was, one teacher in Dallas who wouldn't let other instructors take her class. I mean, she literally would, try to find out if you're teaching somewhere and not let you in because she was trying to maintain her secrets or whatnot. And I thought, that's just silly. I mean, what are you trying to do? And again, it's generally from a position of fear.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've never heard of anyone doing that before. And I feel like, I mean, that's like a huge put off to me to begin with, but I wonder what was going through her head to do that. Ego.
It's all ego driven. I believe. I don't know. I'm just guessing. It was decades ago, but again, in yoga, to all the practitioners and particularly the instructors out there, I'll keep warning of that ego. And then everything I teach and say is usually to remind myself of these things. So, but it is really challenging and it's tricky. It's hard to self promote without feeding the ego. And that, I did an interview this morning and I forgot to Facebook it or check in, and I was at ABC, which would have been a great opportunity. My social media person can just chew me out today because I just don't think of it anymore. I don't, because it's been so problematic in my life, I believe, that I just, I'm really careful of it. So it's a balancing act. And that's why that well and that humbling situation, I say often, you got to get uncomfortable to grow. And, physically, that's the only way we get stronger or longer is to get uncomfortable. But mentally too, you have to put yourself in a situation where you don't know the answer to something. And that's when you regrow. So, I also say only a fool thinks they have nothing to learn. So every day I try to wake up and just not be a fool that day. So
yeah, I love that. It's like a good play on like learn something new every day.
It really is. And it just reminds you. And then, then that ego kind of stays in check. The other thing I think is intent. And that's that drove me to, to make the system as good as it could be. It drove me to, I think, we made helped teach some really great teachers, in Dallas still. And I haven't taught a teacher training now in 2 years because I'd sold American Power Yoga to a company called Sunstone here because I really needed to focus on my genetic company. And I like to change things up every decade anyway, but I haven't trained teachers in about 2 years. But, right now in Dallas, if you go to a free flow, yoga studio, one half of them are owned by my old teachers and most of a good chunk of them are still some of the stronger rock star teachers of these studios. So I think we had a really neat, time. I compare it to like, Haight-Ashbury or, in the 60s or, Seattle music scene or something. We just had we had an amazing group of talented individuals. And again, I think it was a spinoff off that Kung Fu wheel. And it's still going, even though, I sold the company, the energy and the people I run into them all the time are still out there, changing the world. And they've added their own, technique as well. I mean, I think all teachers kind of parrot their instructors early on, but part of our training was always to learn your own messaging and have that authentic presence. So that I think is what's resonated. And that's not taught in a lot of trainings that I've seen. I mean, yoga teachers are leaders, and to be a leader, you must first lead yourself. And that to me is a critical part, of becoming a teacher. I mean, most people who get into yoga are lost, and a lot of people remain lost. So it's a tricky job, and it's a challenging way to make a living. I personally don't think, I think it's fairly problematic to solely make a living off teaching yoga. unless you get into studio ownership and that type of stuff. And that is very different than teaching. That's operations, which was very challenging for me. So, I don't know. That's kind of my take on that.
Yeah. I think you touched on something really important at the end there, talking about, I was thinking when you were first saying like you were teaching 18 classes a week for 2 years, and I was thinking like, how long can you do that before you burn out?
Yeah. Well, about 2 years, I can tell you. Well, again, Ben, I had my and I don't know, it's interesting. You do burn out because it is the other thing, and I get pushback, and again, I'm a contrarian, so I don't mind it, but it's a performance. I mean, you're performing, and I got a discussion with kind of a super traditional, teacher who, I think, thought everything I did was abomination or whatnot. But she was like, well, I'm just sharing my practice with people. And I'm like, no, I disagree with that. You aren't engaging at that point. If you can't warrant attention or hold someone to captivate that attention, you can't help them. So, to me, teachers are performers. That doesn't mean what we say isn't authentic or that we're doing it for the wrong reason or whatnot. But I think it's important to recognize you're a performer. So to your point, yeah, you can get burned out, but it's also how you get really good. I mean, great musicians start out in bars and they're playing every single night, and that's where you get good. So, you want to put yourself in that uncomfortable situation, I believe, to really kind of forge. And it also develops that constitution too. I say, the hardest thing about being a yoga teacher is not running people safely through poses. So that is much harder than people think. It is showing up every day with the constitution, emotional constitution, as well as physical constitution, to be able to set down your own stuff and pick up other people's. I mean, we're in the energy business, not really in the yoga or fitness business. It's all about the energy. You got to be able to control your own before you can lead others. Again, back to that, real leaders must lead themselves.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with that. And then, so you were teaching for 2 years full time, but also running a studio. What was the experience like being this full-time yoga teacher and then also owning this business that was in an industry different to anything you'd ever owned before?
The yoga business, American Power Yoga. And I taught full time for 11 years. So, I think it was 11. Then I started, Simplified Genetics as well. But, it was fun. I mean, we did it, my sister and I did it on credit cards and prayer, and this is way back in the day. No one was answering the phone, and people were just opening the studio, teaching a class, and closing the studio. I thought, that doesn't make sense, man. You got to be open. And I wanted that community. And now people talk about the third place. I mean, this is way before that term came up, but we had that. So, we lived up there, and we had a little tea, a little sitting area, and all kinds of stuff. So it was awesome. It was almost a little communal. But that's where we created that family. And, I still have people who trained with me back in 2001. They still come to my classes wherever I'm teaching these days. So it was wonderful. And we learned the hard way. I mean, I remember, it was January, our building got broken into and our safe got stolen. So after our first month in business, all our money got stolen. We'd already used all our credit cards just to open the place, and because we didn't know we needed to bolt the safe down. So whoever the robber was like, these guys are idiots. They just picked up the safe and took it. So we had a big learning curve, but but what we did, this is the second month we were in business. And we told everyone what happened, and we made enough money to pay rent on time, by February 1st. So it was that power of sharing and really being authentic.
Wow, that's amazing. It's kind of interesting. That just reminded me of a studio that I worked for back in Canada. Somebody stole a keyboard one time, and the safe is actually not locked down either, but they stole the keyboard from the computer. I was like, who on earth steals a keyboard from a yoga studio? Who steals money from a yoga studio?
That's funny. Well, I know. Our building was it's kind of a sketchy building. We were a new company in a sketchy building with a back door, but it was funny. But, that's just kind of, it's all part of it. So, the business of yoga is tricky. It's a service business. So, I mean, I love teaching, and I still teach, and I will still teach, and I don't own studios, but it's part of my expressions, part of my art, if you will. And again, also, I need to hear this stuff. I mean, I'm good at sharing it just because I needed to use these tools so many times in my life. That's the only reason. I never claimed to master it. I'm just really good at sharing it because I need to hear it myself. But now it's a tricky business. So, you have the route to be a hired gun, kind of a mercenary, and just go out and do your thing. But I think that's a little problematic because you don't forge that bond, I think, with your students when you're bouncing from one studio to another. So, I like to find a home, and I suggest instructors do that and then cultivate a following accordingly. And then, the economics, to your point earlier with the performance aspect, a lot of people don't have the constitution to teach 18 classes a week. And there is some burnout stuff, that can take effect. But, teaching yoga, you can't do 40 hours a week. I mean, that's where it becomes very challenging as far as from a financial standpoint. And also, unless you do, I got lucky enough to, I picked up to host, 2 seasons, 80 episodes of a show called Yoga for Life, which, was broadcast across the country and actually it's owned by the station was owned by Z Television out of India. So, Yoga for Life has actually been seen all over the world. I was in Bahrain for just a couple weeks ago for the genetic company, and, the people who bought the distribution rights for Simply Fit in Bahrain, knew me from TV. And so when I went to their house, the kids were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you're here." And they think I was some, TV star because I was on the Fine Living channel in their country, which is like a big network TV. So that I'm kind of the David Hasselhoff of yoga. I'm like really big in these like really small places. So,
that's so cool. What did that feel like?
It was really funny. It was just, it was humbling. It was really sweet. And, this one family, the mother, had done yoga with me, the son and the daughter, and then their kids knew me from the TV as well. And they were, honor that I was in their house. And, it was a really unique, moment. But even like on my Facebook, I mean, half my fans or friends or whatever, are from all over the world. And, I'll get beautiful notes from Algeria and Iran and, all over the place. I've had to look up what these places are. I've never even heard of some of them, but I'm fairly worldly in those countries. I was like, I don't know where this is, but it reminds you that everyone's looking for the same thing. Everyone, Algeria, that's a pretty sketchy place, man. And there's girls over there who are trying to find peace and trying to, stay calm and trying to stay focused and trying to get in shape or whatever. So it's gratifying and it's really unique. That was a great opportunity, and that got me good in front of a camera, and that's a whole other thing. So when I was alluding to the business of yoga and, the fact that it is a service industry and that it's a service industry that it's hard to do because you have to put so much energy in it. So that's where being able to record it is also way or mechanism in which to share with more people, but also from a financial standpoint, it's wise to do. And, but it's hard. I mean, that's very, people are like, "Oh, you're a natural." I was like, no, I wasn't. I had to work. I mean, my first season, they brought in a camera coach, and that was kind of unique because it was interesting. I'm sure you're familiar with like the heart chakra, right?
Yeah.
So the camera coach from LA knew nothing about chakras or energy and could care less, right? He knew focus groups, right? But he told me that if I pictured, talking to the camera from my heart, or as I call it, my heart chakra, right? He knew if I did that, people at home would think that I care about them, that I would be more connected. So I was like, whoa. And I thought that was fascinating because here we are, as I teach teachers to teach in class, I have them speak from the heart. I know I want to cord. It's a Reiki technique to cord people from your heart chakra. And here this guy didn't care anything about that, but he knew statistically from science, from focus groups, that if you did this, it worked. So it can translate, but it is very, very tricky. But, I got to do 80 episodes of that. And then really the coup de grace was something called APY 60, which, was 20 hours of content. It was 60 individual days of training, 60, Then 10 weeks of progressively classes that got harder, and then 10 weeks of Kurt's Kitchen, where I had a chef and a nutritionist and whatnot. And it was really, it was an infomercial piece, 22 hours. Erin Murphy, who was Tabitha from Bewitched, was my co-host.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was really fascinating. It was a neat experience, and really rewarding to do, and helped a lot of people. But here's the tie-in was this is, here I did and I've hosted, I produced radio shows, and I've got to interview a bunch of great authors, all in the health and wellness field. And, the APY60, I put together everything I could possibly think of to help people, change people's lives, all kinds of tricks and from everyone. And, but it still didn't work for everyone. And this is what was really starting to frustrate me. Here I am, APY was American Power Yoga was a warm class, about 85 degrees. Super pool of sweat, man. I mean, it was a no joke class, and people, came 4 or 5 times a week for 5-10 years. And I found that some people got in good shape. Some people got in great shape. Some people got in good shape. Some people thousands of classes in. I saw them. They were there day after day after year. Their body composition did not change at all. Now, I was so confused. I mean, I assumed they were eating double bacon cheeseburgers before and after class, or leaving to get a shaker. I'm like, what are they doing? And then I got married, and I married into a very science family. My father-in-law was a biosimilar drug manufacturer, and he was making, interferons or long proteins for interferon treatment. So marrying into this family, I had access to full sequence genetic analysis, and that's where I was like, And what they didn't have, what I had, how I wound up to be, the CEO of a genetic company, which is, I can't believe I would have bet 1,000,000 to 1 against that I would ever teach yoga, let alone found a system. I would bet 1,000,000 to 1 against that ever be CEO of a genetic company. So I'm still pretty shocked by all of it. But how I got here was, genetics had the answers, all kinds of answers, but what I had were the questions. And all this, I'm sure every instructor listening gets the same questions. Tell me what to eat. Tell me what to do. What should I take? And those are the questions. And I, for years in TV and programs, I gave what worked for me. I gave the latest and greatest research and whatnot. And, looking back, I now statistically know, like with my APY60 program, I can tell you 30% of the people who did it got in the best shape of their lives. 30% got in pretty good shape. And I can tell you 40%, their body composition did not change at all. In fact, they probably got a little bit more fat and probably a little bit more tired. And it comes down to stimulus. And that's where, we're talking about just the physical aspect of a yoga practice, or a physical yoga practice. Typically that generates, low intensity, or it's low intensity for people, at their heart. So when we look with the Simply Fit, we look at receptors, much like receptors in your ear, right? Exercise, yoga, food, supplementation, all forms of stimulus, much like a flashlight, right? So if I took a working flashlight stimulus, shined it into a working ear, receptors, they don't work. Why? It's the wrong stimulus for the wrong receptor. Most people, what do? They get a bigger flashlight, right? They try more of the same thing, but it never really works, and there's actually a downside to it. It can create cravings and fatigue and that type of stuff, because the body has to do something with stimulus. If I took that same flashlight and moved it to my eye, all of a sudden it works right away, every single time. It's the right stimulus for the right receptor. So that's where we started to move, and I created Simply Fit, because you can't tell by looking. And my wife's probably the best example. She always thought she would just kind of be a little chubby. Her sister's super flat stomach and that type of stuff. But my wife always struggled with her weight. Not a whole bunch of weight, but she always had like 10 pounds she imagined she had to lose, and it was always around her stomach and that type of stuff. She was a fellow yoga teacher as well. She was doing about 10 hours of yoga a week. She was gluten-free, sugar-free, militant with her diet. She also took naps every day. When we got her tested, we looked at the receptors that are largely responsible for her body composition. She needs 90% high intensity. So she was just shining a big old flashlight in her ear. Now she works out. She exercises about an hour and a half a week. 3 30-minute sessions of high intensity, and she has a better six-pack than I do. I mean, it's the right. She doesn't take naps anymore. She's loose with her diet and that whole bit. So she sprints and she meditates, and that's her practice. That's her yoga, if you will. because she still gets present. She still embraces reality. She still practices, focus and awareness, but she does it at a different heart rate. So her body composition works. Myself, I have the most problematic genotype that we've ever looked at. I also have the most common. And it's problematic now because of the environment. Statistically speaking, I'm the most likely to be obese or diabetic, but here at 52, I run like 6% body fat or whatever. I mean, I run at an optimal body composition. Mm-hmm. And the reason is I know what I need to do. I need 7 sessions of low intensity and 3 sessions of high intensity, 70-30 split. And me and about 43% of all men have this genotype. And it's common because of this. During the last famine, I had the best genes to have. Other people would be dying off of starvation. I'd feel a little peckish because I store fat like a rock star. So it's not good or bad genes. It's problematic environments. I mean, what we're looking at is kind of the speed of evolution. So that's where I need, 7 out of 10 workouts are nice and slow and long like a yoga class, and 3 out of 10 are short duration and super high intensity to stimulate the body to create the right catecholamines. 19% of people are like my wife, who just needs high intensity. 8% of women can just do yoga or long walks. And I'm talking about being optimal. If you look at humans and humanoids, Homo sapiens are lean cat-like creatures naturally. So if we create the right environment, the body wants to return to homeostasis, wants to return to the lean cat-like creature because it's the most efficient. I mean, Homo sapiens weren't the smartest, they weren't the biggest, they weren't the strongest. We adapted the best. We were the most efficient, which is why we survived and all the other species did not. So with Simply Fit, you just kind of you find out what environment you need to create, epigenetic, what world you need to create so your genes thrive. It's been fascinating. And, I launched it at American Power Yoga, which is a horrible business move. Okay. Cause, so many people need high intensity. So I created new classes at a higher heart rate. And I would present the same messaging that I do in a yoga class because it's all the same thing. Just because I'm moving faster doesn't mean it's not yoga, particularly if I'm doing it, if it's mindful, if I'm practicing awareness as I do, if I'm embracing reality, if I'm looking at each challenge, as a pose and as a gift, then it is. So, I would argue, as you can probably pick up on, I would argue, it doesn't matter what heart rate you're at. If you're fully present, you're practicing yoga. It doesn't matter what you're doing. Most people practice yoga when they're making love. Honestly, I think that's the most common time that people do yoga and don't know it because they're fully present. They're fully there. That's what happens when we use our senses or we lose our mind. They say all suffering is source of attachment. And, the most common thing to attach to on this planet are our own thoughts, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. So when you feel, right? When you feel, you don't think. When you don't think, you don't suffer. And that's why we use the poses, but that's why you can do a lot of other things and still be fully present and not suffer thoughts.
Right. Yeah. That's really, really interesting stuff. I'm curious with Simply Fit and Simplified Genetics, how does it work to actually test what your genes are? Like, is it a blood test that you do, or what's that?
No, yeah, good question. It's just a cheek swab. We have our own lab on the LSU campus in the Emerging Technologies facility, and we just do a little cheek swab. So you can do it at home. We work with a lot of doctors, but we can also, you can get it online and retail and whatnot. And then we do a method called the Sanger method. A lot of consumer genetic analysis, particularly all the novelty stuff, they use SNP analysis, which is about 60-something% accurate. And it was thought to be a single nucleotide polymorphism, SNP analysis. And it's just not very accurate. It's great for population studies. We can remove outliers and kind of get trends and that type of stuff. But for individuals, it's highly inaccurate. And with genetic, if you get tested once and it's accurate, you never have to get tested again. Your genes don't change. So we use the same methodology that my father-in-law did for his biosimilar drug manufacturing. So we look at 500 base pairs just to get a read on one location. And then we replicate the results. There's coded and non-coded. So we actually replicate the results in our lab before we send out results. So we do it twice, and it's really hard to do. I mean, as you can imagine, genetic analysis is pretty tricky.
Yeah.
And we still have to redo like 12%. I mean, 12% of the time we don't get the same answer, and we have to start over. But that's the only way I can ensure accuracy. So it takes a little bit more time, and it's a little bit more expensive. But again, you only have to do it once in your life, and And even that Simply Fit was, what makes us different than other people who are in the space besides the accuracy part is really the intent. Our first iterations of the reports were super content heavy. I wanted to, I had to convince people that genetics was something they could use, and here's how. And no one read it. I mean, I would, test my friends or whatnot, and I'd call them the next day. I'm super excited. I still get excited to give people results. Super excited to get, and I'm like, what do you think? What do you think? They're like, oh, I haven't read it yet. I'm like, what do you mean? So I was going to wait till the weekend or something. I'm like, no. So, now our results, again, back to knowledge without action has no power. Now our results are very much behavioral change support because, I don't want to sell a bunch of genetic analysis. I want to give people tools that they'll use to change their life and improve their life. And, it's fat. In fact, when I was with that family in Bahrain, this came up. I was like, and I never looked at it this way, but I was at the museum actually in Bahrain looking at that part of the world before oil was discovered. It was very poor, like Bedouin type stuff. And I imagine going back to those people and going, you know what? In a couple hundred years, food is going to be so abundant and we're going to be so comfortable, it will literally be killing us. And I don't think those people would ever believe us, but that's what's happening right now. I mean, really, our comfort and the abundance, our comfort and abundance is killing us. It's giving us diabetes and obesity and all kinds of, and then there's all these stress-related diseases that are based on that. And a lot of that stress and angst comes from frustration because they can't seem to get they can't control their body. And so, Simplified Genetics, our only product is your body's instruction manual. It should have been in the book or in the box, but it wasn't. So yeah. I found, it's just not that hard, man. I mean, like I said, my wife struggled for decades and she just thought she'd be a little chubby all her life. That was her body style. It's not at all. She's a size 0 now, and she works out so much less and stresses so much less. So it's cool because when you give people back, I like to, I don't want to claim this, but I'm a reminder that people in yoga, I remind people that they have control of their life. They choose the labels. Things aren't good or bad. Things are whatever you want them to be. And most of the time they serve, right? In genetics, we're giving back that same control as well. When people, like my wife, she just thought she'd be trouble the rest of her life. She had just given up, right? When people give up control of themselves, they lose control of other elements like careers and relationships and that type of stuff. So what we've seen is when people actually get control of their body, they actually start to control other elements of their life, like careers and relationships and that type of stuff. So, my wife's a very different person now, and she doesn't stress. Like if we go out or want to have a dessert or whatever, she's not worried about it at all. I mean, we just had another child, and she wasn't worried about getting back into shape because she knows exactly what she needs to do, eat and take, and her body's a sports car. I mean, that's even when I have to get ready for my dreaded yoga photo shoot because because the aging process I have to update every couple of years, and how challenging that is. And I try to rock it shirtless and whatnot. So, but even then with my problematic genotype, I tighten up on things for a week or two and I'm back to, I'm comfortable in front of a camera without a shirt or whatever. So it's a powerful, powerful thing. It's been a really neat thing, but it's very disruptive. It's disruptive, it's disruptive to the yoga community because, not everyone can use yoga for body composition. It just doesn't work for, a large percentage of the population. It's disruptive to the fitness community. I mean, at first I went to trainers because I was like, hey, I can make all of you 100% effective with all your clients from day one. I was ready to be hailed the Messiah and had parades and stuff. And, the resistance was incredible because they were threatened. I was like, I'm not trying to threaten you. We should be your first tool. But it broke myths like more is better and harder is better. It's just not true. I mean, you got to do high intensity, you burn fat. Nope. Some people do. Some people don't. I mean, it's all these fitness myths, and that's where we had to pivot and go to clinicians. Now the fitness world is coming around. We're starting to work with, some top trainers and we're working with some gyms and that type of stuff. So the world is finally starting to change, but, the yoga community will have to embrace it as well at some point in time. Just because, I'm sure you've seen people right now. I bet you could think of people who come to class all the time, but their body composition doesn't change.
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
everyone does.
Yeah. It's something that you see so often as a yoga teacher, and you see it being frustrating as well. And,
exactly. And guilt and angst and all this other stuff that's not necessary. It's just not hard. When you know what you need to do, eat and take, it's just not hard. It's having a map. I mean, that's it. Genetics provides a map. Blood work and that type of stuff is great, and that shows traffic on the map, but the map doesn't change ever. So it's a powerful thing. And I can, and I always do this in interviews, listeners right now who can't afford it or don't want to get tested, just listen to this. If you're doing something and it's not working and you feel tired or you suffer cravings, you're doing the wrong thing. And what I mean by the wrong thing is it's the wrong heart rate. Some people can take a yoga class and they can be next to each other. For one, it could be high intensity, and one, it could be low intensity, depending on their heart health, because that's a moving target. So, people just need to look at movement and divvy it up in between high intensity for them at that time or low intensity for them at that time. Not to get too deep into science, but we look at when you move, you create catecholamines, exercise does. And they come in, catecholamines come in basically two flavors, high or low. And we look at the receptors that bind to it. So that's where we can do it. So if you don't want to get tested, just experiment. But keep in mind that, you can do yoga and walks and biking and swimming, and that could, it sounds like a lot of different things, but it's all the same thing to your body if it's all at that low intensity. You could do CrossFit and spin and step and whatever, and that sounds like a lot of different things, but to your heart, it's the same thing. It's all high intensity. So, it's nice because I'm agnostic when it comes to exercise. I say do things you like, and do things that are safe, and do things that you like, because no matter how good something is for you, if you don't like it, you won't do it for long.
Yeah.
So, and it also means you can change things up. You can do all kinds of fun things. So to me, it's a bit liberating, but I've had, a lot of my hardcore yogis, push, my wife loved yoga years. She was a Lululemon girl, all that stuff. And, she does only high intensity, but that's what her body wants. That's what that's the stimulus her body needs. So she had to develop a different yoga practice, mainly meditation, because that's, because the low intensity wouldn't serve her.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, yoga can serve so many different purposes as well. I'm curious how you went from yoga teacher, seeing you identified these challenges that different people were experiencing, to fully understanding all the science of this and founding a company that's doing genetic testing. Yeah.
It was just research, man. I mean, that's really it. It was, a lot of it was, my father-in-law has a couple doctorates in molecular biology and genetics, and my wife was a lab mutt. She has a bunch of different, she was not a PhD or whatever. She had a ton of school and just grew up in this, science family. So we developed the algorithm. None of it's our research. It's all peer-reviewed research. It's all vettable. We've had to go through that process with a couple of the larger companies we work with to prove that every recommendation is based on peer-reviewed research. But it was 2 years. I did not have a kitchen table. For 2 years, there was research piled on our kitchen table. And it was 2 years to develop, this algorithm, to interpret it, because we look at 4 receptors, and most genetics now looks at one receptor as you have this polymorphism, it means this. You have this, it means that. But we look at these 4 genes in the obesity gene map, and we look at them comprehensively, because what you are on a nuclear receptor we look at can influence how the adrenergic receptors that we look at act. So even though we look at just 4, a loci, there's 81 possible combinations of the genes on those 4, and then men and women are different. So the output for Simply Fit, there's 162 possible variations of Simply Fit. Now, we haven't seen all 162 in nature, because some genotypes combinations just are more rare than others. But that's how we dove in. And honestly, it's funny because, look, I was, I think I mentioned, I got sent to military school as a child. So I've always been free spirited, and I only had 6 weeks of college. I mean, so I'm not an academic, and I'm not a doctor, and I'm not a scientist. But so I was really nervous about, I deal with doctors all the time now, and I used to be super nervous about presenting to them because I didn't have that pedigree behind me. But over the last 6 years, man, I've gotten to know this genetic stuff fairly well. So it's really just like yoga. I just dove in. I mean, I took, I probably shouldn't even say this, but here we are. I probably took half a dozen yoga classes before I started teaching. And I trained in Kung-Fu for a decade, but But I seriously, I'm just a few classes here and there, and I was like, okay, let's do this. And I did the same thing with genetics. I just dove in, man. And like I said, learned it. And I really didn't get comfortable with the science until probably the last couple of years. So it took about 4 years to really get comfortable. And just like teaching, I didn't really get super comfortable teaching until after those first 2 years of really banging them out.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. And then you kind of mentioned that there's a little bit of pushback in the yoga community because sometimes it means yoga is not the answer or that people have to change their yoga practice. How has the response been from other people or other communities and that sort of thing who are using and trying Simplified?
Pushback from the fitness world, it is pushback city because everyone has a pony in the race. So the CrossFitters are like, CrossFit works for everyone. No, it doesn't. There's fat CrossFitters. Marathoners will be like, running works for everyone. No, they're fat marathoners. I mean, it just, you look around, you're like, one size doesn't fit all. It's funny, internally, in the company, we call people who think one size fits all flat worlders, because long after the world was proven round, people it just was more comfortable just to assume it was still flat. Everyone was afraid of that. And this is where it's been really challenging, and it's just starting to change. Is say you went back, whenever it was 1600s or whatever, and everyone thought the world was flat. Say somehow you got, an opportunity to get on a plane or whatever and see that the world was round, right? Then you go back to your community, right? And you're like, man, the world's round, everyone. And everyone's like, you're crazy, right? After a little while, if you try to convince people and you can't, then you quit talking about it, right? You just kind of get quiet about it and just not bring it up in conversation anymore. After a while, maybe a year or two, you'll probably start even doubting. Did I really see the world was round? Everyone thinks it's flat, so maybe I was dreaming. You would start doubting the reality. So that's been the challenge. It is so disruptive that even people who get it are like, they'll start to slip back into their old routine of just going, oh yeah. I mean, I've had people who get tested and they use it, and then like 2 years later they're doing the opposite of what they need to do. And they're frustrated and they're like, well, I'm going to try this. I'm like, dude, you got tested. This still works. So, it's not a question of if, it's when everyone will use this, but people are crazy, meaning, they do the same thing expecting different results, or crazier by doing more of the same thing expecting different results. So yeah, the yoga guys who are, the yoga community who are invested in yoga being the answer for everyone push back. The CrossFitters, when CrossFit is for everyone, they push back. It is only, it's the early adopters and people who see that one size doesn't fit all. And that's what genetics will bust down the door eventually. It's just, from pharmacogenetics, where drug interaction to disease pathway to diet or to body composition. I mean, it's not a question of if, it is when. But it's funny, back to the ego. I mean, why doesn't CrossFitters, why don't yogis embrace this information? Well, it challenges their ego. I was wrong. I mean, I'm cool with being wrong. I said, I just told you 40% of the people that paid $100 for, the best I could produce on APY 60, I know it didn't help 40% of the people. I just didn't know. I mean, I didn't know I was wrong. Mm-hmm. But I'm okay. Again, only a fool thinks they have nothing to learn, man. Today I'm not a fool. I know I still have a lot to learn. So it's a very interesting thing, because it almost seems too good to be true. But it works. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a little tricky. But if yogis would get over it has to be this way or that way, then it could work for everyone. Because again, I can teach a high intensity yoga class, if you will. I mean, I don't call it that, but when I teach anything, it's all about awareness and presence. I mean, that's really all it is. So that can be woven into any class, I think, any presentation.
Yeah, definitely. I really enjoy the fact that you compared people who think that one size fits all to like flat earthers. That's great.
It really is. It's just, and that, again, that comes from fear, most likely. Now, one thing I have wanted to do, and when I do it, maybe we can do a follow up. Since we've tested about 11,000 people now, so we have a really big database. It was like last year I was like, hey, we have a great database. We have more information. It was a book. In fact, I was reading a book called Rework. I read, kind of business books or whatever, about one a quarter, just to, pick up new things or try to continue to improve bad habits or whatnot. But this had a interesting challenge talking about businesses, and this will equate hopefully to some of the yogis out there. Is Henry Ford, made cars and whatnot, and he was trying to figure out what to do with all the extra wood that he had from building cars back then. And he started a charcoal company. It's called Kingsford now. So he took a waste product, a byproduct of building cars, and turned it into the largest charcoal company in the world right now. So, or at least in the United States. So so reading that in the book Rework, I was looking at my company with the genetic company. I was like, what's a byproduct of that? And that's where I saw the data. I was like, we have data on tons of people. So what I want to do is send out an Ayurvedic questionnaire to, 1,000 or 2 of our people and see if we can, put them into different doshas, I think they call it, and then see genetically how that comes over. So I could actually kind of genetically test the Ayurvedic presentation of movement and diet. So, and again, or another, ancillary product like to people who are out there teaching would be to film it or whatnot. So you have that secondary product to offer.
Yeah. I love the idea of tying that with Ayurveda and doshas, because I think if you come from more of like a spiritual side, then that's more of like an understandable thing or something you accept. But if you're looking for the science behind doshas, I feel like it's just not really there. Like it's kind of this principle that doesn't have anything to stand on.
No, and it's done by a questionnaire, but now I can put it to the test, and that's that as soon as I have some time, I want to that to me would be a fascinating study and a neat little book. And who knows, maybe it'll support it 100%. That'd be amazing, or maybe it will not. So I have no idea. Again, I don't have a pony in the race. I'm just curious. I mean, that's what got me most of these places, is me just going, what about this? So
yeah, definitely. I love that. And I'm curious when did you decide to sell American Power Yoga to focus entirely on Simplified Genetics?
It was about 2 years ago. It was about 2 years ago. And I was a little burnt out running 2 companies, at the same time at those sizes are pretty tough. And with running a studio is a whole different thing. There's people would be surprised how much drama is in a yoga studio when, yogis should be fairly drama free. And I'm sure everyone listening has run into that, for sure. But, I got to offer. Sunstone is a fairly large kind of regional player here, and but they're a scripted class, and they did that because they want to scale, and I get that. You have to have a consistent product, and again, when I say words like product, I'm not saying that what we do impactful or whatnot. But it's true. I mean, it's also a business, and you have to look at it that way in some ways. And again, it doesn't have to necessarily devalue it. But I thought they were, and honestly, I really thought they were kind of bringing me in to kind of help them bring a soul to their practice, because their practice is not, they don't really message and that type of stuff. And again, I respect the guy who owns it and created it, and I know why he put certain systems in place, because he doesn't want everyone just doing willy-nilly. But in the end, that didn't, I think it was more about, marginalizing a large competitor in Dallas than it was kind of, bringing me into the fold. So, it was an interesting process, but, it was a combination of that, and there was a bunch of turnover at the studio due to teacher drama and whatnot. And that's why I was like, okay, I gotta balance this out.
Yeah,
but
that makes sense.
It was a learning curve, and it was an interesting one. And some days I'm like, I wish I would have kept it, and other days I'm like, I'm happy I didn't. So I mean, I assume it all happens for a reason.
Yeah, you kind of have to trust that you're just like going in the right direction, and everything kind of works its way out.
Yeah, and from a business standpoint, for most people out there, it's hard to sell a studio, because the teachers are the product, and most teachers aren't locked in. So it's a very tricky business, and that's why, to me, it has to be a passion project. Yes, there are ways you can monetize it, but I would advise not to try to make all your money just from teaching yoga. I think that's problematic. And, I think it's limiting as well. I think you stop, you have a harder time relating to other people when you dive so deep in that world. There's a story of two monks I like to bring up. There's two different kinds of monks if you look at it. There's the monk who will go, climb a mountain and stay in a cave for 10 years and find enlightenment. And then there's a monk who lives in the crappiest part of town who helps, homeless people and hookers or prostitutes or whatever, and they work within the lowest community. And I think there's more value in the monk who lives in the city and helps people and interacts with people. It's harder because that monk it has temptations and all kinds of stuff around him and has to maintain true to himself. The monk who's off just focusing on him, yes, there's opportunities and lessons there too, but it doesn't really benefit many people. So, I think mixing it up is important. And, like now I have opportunities. Next week I'm working with, some CEOs of companies and shareholders, and they're coming in, and I'm going to teach them, a class and some other little workshop type stuff. But I can relate to them because I've run sales forces. I can relate to them because I've hired and fired people, and I've run companies. So, I can help them see how people can use yoga in business or yoga or kung fu in business, the art of deflection, if you will. You can use yoga in relationships. So I like mixing it up. I think when people get too myopic, when they get just in their own little world, you lose the ability to relate. And if you can't relate to people, you can't help people. And every teacher I've ever trained, I start with, why are you doing this? And every single one has some kind of iteration of wanting to help people. That's why people get into it. So, you got to connect. You can't be on a pedestal and touch people. You have to be on their level, and you have to kind of mix it up with them and understand their struggles. Make sense?
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of, when I entered the yoga world as a teacher, that was kind of always my gut feeling, was that I never wanted to just be relying on yoga. I guess I felt like it was like a creative outlet for me, and that if I put my need to eat and put a roof over my head on my creative outlet, then I couldn't be as creative with it because there was this pressure on it. And it's kind of something I've just ran with over the last couple of years. And it seems to be working.
No. Yeah, I think it's exactly right. And that's where you go. And then fear creeps in, and then you're fighting for students and then it becomes that finite mentality of, there's only so many students, we have to get ours, instead of, hey, this is my art. And that's really, I look at all of us. I look at all of life as it's art. I mean, that's really what we are. I mean, we come here and our actions on this planet are art, and then that's what we do. So whether it's yoga or kung fu or presenting or genetics or doing a podcast, this is my art. I can't draw worth anything. So I can play a little music and I can talk and ideally I can I can typically try to. I can increase people's enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is the Greek for filled with spirit, and that to me is what anyone does. They should be enthusiastic about it. That to me is the guide, and that's it. We're all artistic, energetic beings, and the expression of that is what we do. So if you aren't enthusiastic, if you aren't filled with spirit, about what you're doing, do something else. I mean, that to me is the guiding principle of almost everything I do. I mean, people are like, "Oh, you're so passionate," because I'm doing what I really love, and that's it. And I can't imagine not doing it. And and some of the things I do is hard, but hard and bad are not the same thing. Again, people love a tough class, and people will thank me after particularly hard classes that I'll offer. And then I'll ask them, I'll say, well, because I made them shake and get uncomfortable and all that good stuff. And I'll say, so you thank me after class and pay me and all kinds of stuff. Do you thank the rest of the people in your life who cause you discomfort and cause you pain and challenge? Do you thank them? Do you pay them? What would life be like if you did thank that person who just yelled at you and got upset and whatever, made you uncomfortable? It would blow them away. But why wouldn't you? The poses on the mat merely represent the challenges outside in the real world. So it's all preparation for that. So it's just a different attitude. Why not embrace challenge? Again, early on I said it in a different variation of it, but if you divvy up the most meaningful things in your life, easy or hard, most will come down on the hard side or the challenging side. So why are we looking for an easy way when it's the challenges that serve? So, and that's challenges of getting out in front of an audience for the first time and, doing that thing or starting your own business or whatever. So.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. I want to be mindful of your time, but I'm curious if you have time for one more question.
Sure.
So when I was reading through your bio, one of the things that I found super interesting was that you were the yoga trainer for the Dallas Cowboys. How did you score that gig?
Yeah, it was the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. And I've trained some of the Cowboys too. Let's see. How did I get that gig? I think I got that through MTV. I got that through MTV. MTV was doing the DVD with the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. They wanted to do it. So MTV came to town and just took, did different classes. They wanted to find a local teacher to do it. And I think one of the interns had stumbled into one of my classes and then just mentioned me. So, it was just really just a random. And that's, I tell people you never know who's going to be in your class. I mean, I got the Yoga for Life from the same thing. It was a producer at this production house in Dallas who, when she moved here from New York or whatever, she had taken a few of my classes. Then she moved up north to north part of town when she got married or whatever. And it was like a year later when they were looking for, a host of Yoga for Life. And she threw my name in the hat and she hadn't taken a class from me in a year and didn't even know if I still taught there, but just, but I'd made such a difference to her that she remembered my name and whatnot. Same thing with the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. I was just at I taught someone and kind of, I made an impact on someone. So then when the opportunity arose, they came and found me. Yeah. So, to me, and I say that the currency of our life is attention. Okay. The only thing you could ever really pay is attention. Every relationship we have is built on the exchange of attention from lover to employer, right? If you don't believe me, go to work and go to sleep. They aren't paying you to be there. They're paying you for your attention. And that's, money is exchanged for attention. So why not live all in? Why not be on fully, pay full attention to everything that we do? In fact, most disruption are from perceived inequalities of attention, right? Most relationship issues are based on, you don't care as much as I do or for whatever manifestation of that, but it all comes down to attention. So I guess, my final suggestion to everyone out there is bring your best every single time. Be fully present because you don't know where that opportunity will lead. I mean, I was getting interviewed by ABC News this morning, and this piece on Simply Fit will be very impactful for my company and when it airs during Sweeps Week in May. But I got that because I did a presentation at a yoga studio talking about body composition and a person there happened to be a health reporter for ABC, and that's how it happened. But you got to do things. I mean, that's, if I didn't do that little free presentation, which I almost blew off, it never would have led to this. Had I not sold my company, I wouldn't have been at that yoga studio. I mean, there's all kinds of different nuances or things at work there. But if everyone, most regrets come from not doing things. So do it, but do your best, man. Never phone it in. And that's where enthusiasm comes in. If you don't care enough not to bring your best, and then just don't do it at all and find something that you do care about. Find something that fills you with spirit. And when you do that, then the rest just happens, man. You just gotta buckle up and get ready for the ride.
Amazing. I love that. I think that's the perfect place to end. If people want to learn more about you, where can they go to find out more about what you're up to?
Man, probably Facebook it was best right now. I need to work on a website or whatnot. If they want to find more about Simplified Genetics, it's simplifiedgenetics.com. And I'm easily found. And if you want to find me, go to Kurt or email me at kurt@simplifiedgenetics.com. That's KURT. But also I'm out there on Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff. My last name is a little tricky to spell. It's Johnsen as opposed to ON. But yeah, other than that, I'm easily found out there and always looking to hear from people. And I love this type of interaction. So reach on out. Okay. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Kurt. It was awesome chatting with you. Oh, my pleasure. I'll give you one other, if they want to check out Simplified Genetics, if they want to use my promo code, they'll save like 20%. It's KURT20, KURT 20. And that way anyone can check it out. Awesome. Yeah. I'll put that in the show notes as well. So thank you for that. Cool. My pleasure, man. It's been an absolute pleasure.
All right, guys, I hope that you enjoyed that episode. I know that there's a lot of sort of science-y stuff about health and fitness, but I thought it was really, really interesting to learn about Simplified Genetics and Simply Fit. I'm super curious to check out the genetic test myself, since I've got that cool promo code as MBOM listeners. And I hope that you guys recognize the business lessons out of that and we're kind of able to pick them out. I've done pretty thorough show notes up on the website at mbomyoga.com. So go check that out. And you can join the community on Facebook and Instagram at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And you can sign up for the newsletter, which comes out usually about once a month if I have something else exciting to share with you, maybe a couple times a month. And you can join that at mbomyoga.com/newsletter. And I am still looking for a couple more questions for the Q&A episode that's coming up soon. Season 2 is coming to a wrap in just a couple of weeks. So I really want to do a great Q&A episode before we finish up the season. So if you have any questions that you really want answered, send me an email at info@mbomyoga.com. As always, thanks so much for listening and namaste.